Good. That's fine. Hey guys, welcome to the live stream. Travel day for me. So I'm in Dallas, Texas right now with my family. Super stoked to be back for the holidays. And just a couple things here before we get going on the questions. First and foremost, if you guys have a specific question and you want to make sure that I see it, do a super chat. And we've got Sebastian on the line right now. And if you do a super chat, he will text that question to me and I'll answer it ASAP. Number two is if you guys want to book an hour to ask me specific questions, I've done a few of those and they've gone really, really well. I got some really neat people that are in the community. But we talk about investing or entrepreneurship questions, diversifying overseas. If you guys want to know how to make money with old Ford pickups, anything like that, you can email Sebastian at admin@georgegammon.com and he'll go ahead and set up a specific time slot. I'm not going to be doing anything until probably Friday, just so I can spend time with my family for the holidays. But let's go and dive right in. Try to go to we'll do it that same way where I just ask the questions that are pulling up just right in the stream. See, and make sure guys, when you ask a question, put question in capital letters before you do the comment, and then I'll see it right away. So Johnny asks, how is crime in Colombia? Is it good for retirement? The crime is almost non-existent. It's just as safe, if not safer, than any city that you'd go to in the United States, especially some of the bigger cities. It's going to be way safer than like a Chicago or a Washington, D.C., anything like that. And then, let's see, what was the rest? Oh, as far as retirement, it's fantastic. The cost of living is incredibly cheap. The weather's amazing. They call it the Valley, at least where I am in Medellin, they call it the Valley of Eternal Spring because you've got this really interesting dynamic where you're right on the equator, but you're at a high enough elevation to where the weather never changes. It's 80 degrees every day, 70, 65 at night. It's and then if you're down there, especially if you're a retiree and you're on a fixed income, if you're making $2,000 or $3,000 USD a month down there, you're gonna live like a king. So it's a fantastic place to retire. Okay, let me see if we got any. Okay, I got Sebastian's feed pulled up here. Okay, Theodore asks, silver is much more of an industrial metal than gold. Yes. Does this limit how high silver's price can go since it's needed in so many essential industrial products? Actually, I think it's the reverse. Generally, if you look at when gold goes into a big bull market, silver will go up even further. So it's almost like a leveraged way to play gold. Right now, I'm looking at the two in a little bit different light. I'm looking at gold as an insurance policy and silver as more of a speculation. But obviously, I like them both. Okay. Narada. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Narada just says Merry Christmas with a super chat. Merry Christmas to you and Merry Christmas to everyone else. I hope you guys are all able to spend some time with your family. I know I'm really looking forward to it. I'm here at my sister's house in Dallas. Got my mom coming in tomorrow, so it's gonna be awesome. Okay, next question. Ufda asks, as an average Joe with a solid job, some credit card debt, how will this recession really hammer me? It really depends. If we go into a stagflation, that's probably my base case, but who knows? You could go into deflation, you could go into, I don't think we'll get real growth. anytime soon, unfortunately. But you're looking at the unemployment rate going up. So that's why I always suggest that people invest in themselves, invest in your own education, learn a skill. If you've got something that you can produce things that other people can't produce, there's always going to be demand for that, and you'll always do well. As far as your credit card debt, yeah, you really want to try to get that down as soon as you can, because that's on a variable rate. So that interest rate could go through the roof if we get some inflation. And I know the interest rates on credit cards right now are very close to an all-time high, although interest rates are extremely low. So any type of credit card debt is not good. That's not to say all debt is bad. If you go into a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, that's good debt, but that's debt that's working for you because you're controlling a cash flowing asset. Consumer debt, you don't want any part of that, especially when it's an adjustable rate. Okay, Rio Co, thank you for the super chat. Asks thoughts on the European scenario. Deutsche runs out of loans because cost to income greater than 100%. See, negative interest creates deflationary recession followed by ECB inflation. I think that's a good possibility. I think that's a good possibility in the United States as well. If you look at all the developed economies, the natural progression, if it wasn't for the central banks printing all this money and injecting all this artificial liquidity, it would be deflation, because you've got so much debt in the system that when you go through the business cycle, that debt needs to inflate. So those are the two cross currents, that tug of war that's going on. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but the European situation is a little bit different because, to my knowledge, at least the Bank of England, so the UK banks, don't have reserve requirements. So they can do some things that are, I would go so far as say illegal, definitely outside of the box, to prop themselves up. And that's a whole other rabbit hole that I'm not going to go down right now. But I think if you're looking at this as a deflationary recession followed by some inflation because the central banks will come in and just print. I think that's that if there's no certainties, but when you're looking at probabilities, I think that's the highest probable outcome right now. Karen asks, thank you, Karen, for the super chat. I own gold, thinking to get some savings, move to gold-backed debit card. Good idea. Which do you recommend? Well, first and foremost, Karen, I wouldn't, although I'm bullish on gold, I think it's a great insurance policy. I wouldn't do more than 10% of your investable portfolio in gold, because although we may get inflation, gold can go to, who knows, 5,000, 10,000 an ounce. But that could be 10 years down the road, and you have all that capital tied up in an asset that's not paying you to own it. So I want to preface with that. Secondly, as far as a gold debit card, I haven't researched those too much. I know that Gold Money has one that I've heard is pretty good, but I haven't researched it enough to give you the thumbs up on it. So I would, if I'm just looking at an insurance policy, I'm looking at physical, because that's the safest bet. If you're looking at it as a speculation, then I wouldn't do physical, but I wouldn't do pure gold. I'd look at maybe the miners, something like that. But again, make sure that it's not more than 5 or 10% of the portfolio. Okay, Lala asks, thank you, Lala, for the super chat. I sleep on this channel. Okay, I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you, Lala. Thank you for your service. Merry Christmas. I'm looking forward to your master class, Speaking It into Existence. Well, I haven't thought of doing a video like that as far as the mental side of investing or entrepreneurship, but especially in entrepreneurship, that is really, really crucial. that you get the mindset right. So I think that may be a good topic for a future video after the holidays. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you as well. The Dallas Edwards, thank you for the super chat. Just says, thanks for the great work you do for all of us. Okay, no problem. I really enjoy doing it. Okay, back to the chats. Scott asks, George, do you own any cryptocurrencies? I do not. I do not right now because I've got so much of my portfolio allocated to real estate. But when I sell one of my properties, the furthest along project that I have right now in Medellin is about a month from completion. So as soon as I get that sold, I'm going to roll it over into more rental or into more properties, real estate projects, but I'll probably have more of the portfolio allocated to speculation, in which case I may consider that. I kind of like the miners right now for speculation a little bit better, but as of right now, I don't. If I do, I'll definitely do a video on it. Okay. So, Bollinger. Hi, Bollinger. Thanks for being in the comments all the time. I really appreciate that. Got a question. Unemployed versus not in labor force. Any thoughts on how U.S. tracks their fake stats? Again, to keep confidence up. 38% of working age people in the United States are not employed, and they set all-time low. Well, that's a great point. I know that the unemployment numbers are cooked just like the inflation numbers. I don't know to what extent. I think Shadow Stats has a lot of info on that. But the main thing that you got to look at with the unemployment numbers is the labor force participation. So you can have 2% unemployment, but if the labor force participation is 50%, that's not good. So most people just look at that headline number and they don't look at labor force participation. To be fair, I think the labor force participation has been increasing lately, but I would start with looking at that so you get a true glimpse of unemployment. And then I'd go to Shadow Stats and look at some of the work that they do there to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. Okay, we got another super chat from Jesse James. Thank you, Jesse. Could you take a bit more time to talk about some honest mistakes you have made that you learned from that eventually helped you or could help us? How long have you got, Jesse? We could go on all night about the mistakes I've made. I think first and foremost would be buying an asset as an investment. And again, we've got to differentiate between an investment and a speculation. But buying an asset that doesn't pay you to own it. So I'll give you a specific example. I've got a lot of property right now in Ecuador, and it's a gorgeous coastline. It's the most popular coastline for building homes in all of Ecuador. It's like the Malibu of Ecuador. And I mean, the celebrities want to be there, the athletes, all that stuff. So it's very high demand. But Ecuador is only a country of maybe 15 million people. So you can have the best piece of property. And I've got oceanfront property right there too. And but it can take you 3-4 years to sell it. Doesn't necessarily mean that you got to lower your price. It's just there's no buyers. So I went in and bought that property a few years ago. I can't remember exactly what year. And I was going to build condominiums there right on the ocean looking out. And the project didn't go through for a variety of reasons. But now I've still got the property. It's an amazing piece of land, and the property taxes are almost non-existent. So there's not too many carrying costs. But that piece of property is tied up, and I probably got, at least 150,000 in that property that's tied up, 150,000 US tied up in that property. Where if I would have bought an asset that would have paid me to own it, as an example, if I would have bought a house on the ocean or on that beachfront property. Even if it wasn't very liquid, I could still rent that out and collect, let's say, $2,000 a month, and while I'm just waiting to sell it. So if your worst case scenario is you're getting paid 8% or 10% per year to wait until you can sell it, until there's some more liquidity in the market, that's what you want. But instead, it's just sitting there dead weight, and that money is not working for me. So that's probably, I could list 100 other things I've done, but that is the first thing that that comes to mind. And you know what? That's a great video. So I think what I'll do is, and Sebastian, I know you're listening, so please put that on the to-do list for next Friday to kind of put that into the queue. And what I'll do, Jesse, is I will do an entire video on that, because I think that's a really fantastic topic. Okay, Baxter, thanks for the super chat. Baxter asks, would you consider the best way to bet on a 2020 Trump landslide, not just victory, but an absolute landslide by supermajority? I don't like doing that, Baxter. That's just not the way I invest personally. Going back to my philosophy, first and foremost, just buy things when they're cheap, sell them when they're expensive. If you're looking at a strict investment, it's got to pay you to own it. Make sure you diversify, have some insurance with gold, diversify your political risk and currency risk. And that's just more of a gamble to me, because I think that's already baked into the market. If I was going to do anything just as like a side bet, and I hate to even suggest doing that, but if I was going to just do a side bet like that, I'd probably, what would I do? I'd probably short the market, because I don't think anything's going to happen if Trump wins in a landslide, because that's already baked in the market. That's everyone is assuming that. So you want to take the opposite position. If you want to take a flyer on, just like Trump winning in 2000, whenever he won, in 2016. So because that, you had Hillary Clinton with 99% odds. So if you're taking a bet that Trump is going to win, then there's a lot of upside, probably very little downside on that. And if Trump loses, then I would assume that the market will really go down substantially. And so if I was going to take a side bet, that's what I'd do, but I wouldn't do it. I don't like side bets. It's just, I don't like betting. I don't like gambling unless I have the odds in my favor. And then it's more just about investing. I mean, if you're going to speculate, take the same money and speculate on something that's cheap right now, like commodities or something like that. All right. Chatisms, thank you very much. Asked, what area in Kansas City should I invest? Shawnee. No, I wouldn't go on the Kansas side, Chad, because the laws are more tenant friendly on the Kansas side, where the Missouri side, they're much more landlord friendly. And that's obviously what you want. So on the Missouri side, where I like to invest is Blue Springs and Lee Summit. There's a couple parts in Independence that are okay, but it's spotty. So if you're someone that doesn't know the area well, that's what I'd suggest. Again, Lee Summit and Blue Springs. And just so you know, Chad, and for everyone listening, next weekend, next Sunday, I've got a video coming out that I did with my personal real estate agent in Missouri. She's in Blue Springs, where we go down almost like street by street of that entire area of where you want to look, what type of returns you can expect. And it's just a deep dive into buying a turnkey rental property, or even going there and fixing one up to get some built-in equity in Missouri. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that. I think you're really going to love it. That's going to come out next Sunday. Hey, Scott, thanks for the super chat. Oh, thanks, Scott. I appreciate it. No question. So we'll move on to Mark Alexander. Asks, George, you have made me more money. Okay, that's a good one. I don't know how I've done that, but it's fantastic. It says, George, you have made me more money and will make me way more money than this donation. You rock. And well, thank you, Mark. I sincerely appreciate the kind words. And if you've been able to capitalize on any of the videos, that's even better. That's really nice to hear. So the question, house hack, a multi-family in cyclical market, or buy single family in linear market? That's a good question. Wow. Question of the week right there. Let me think about that. You know, it depends, Mark. If you can get a house hack like a triplex that is cash flow positive the day you buy it, not cash flow positive based on a pro forma of rents increasing 5% per annum for the next 5 years. But if you can make it cash flow positive today, the day you buy it, and you can use a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, I would actually suggest house hacking, because it's just such a good investment, especially for a young person, because not only is it cash flow positive, but that money that you would have spent on rent or a mortgage, you can invest that into something else every single month. So take that $1,000 or $1,500 that you would have spent on your housing, you invest that, and at the end of 20 years, 30 years, you're going to have this huge portfolio of money, or of wealth, really, that you've gained from just those payments that would have gone to rent or to a mortgage, and then you've offloaded, or you've kind of subbed out your mortgage payments to your tenants. Not only the mortgage payment, but the taxes, the insurance, most of the maintenance. I mean, it's just the best way to go. And then at the end of 30 years, you retire, you got a fourplex that's paying you every single month. You own it outright. You can leverage the equity to do some more real estate investing. It's just the best financial decision I think anybody can make. Tommy, hey Tommy, good to see you again on the chat. I really appreciate it. Okay, hopefully you're not thinking about that stupid Corvette anymore. We got to talk you out of that, man. You got to forget that. All right, Tommy asks, is it true you got your family an 8x10 autographed glossies for Christmas gifts? What do they think of your channel's success? Well, I mean, my family's great. In fact, my sister's actually just, let's see if we can, yeah, she's trying to hide right there. There she is. But that's my sister. My family's great. They're very supportive in any crazy idea that I have, and I've had some crazy ones. And they really like the channel. They love the channel, in fact. And they're always telling me how they're watching my latest videos. So it's great. Now that I come back here to Dallas, I haven't seen my sister since I started the channel. We can just go back and forth. And she's a huge fan of macro voices and real vision and all that stuff. So that's all we talk about. We could just go on and on for hours. So it's really neat. And my mom's the same way. So she's flying in tomorrow. I'm sure she's going to have a lot to say about interest rates or the Fed or the real estate market as well. All right, John, thanks for the super chat. Asks, which country do you recommend for a second citizenship? Are you a citizen of Colombia? Can you elaborate on the potential tourist or perpetual tourist scenario? Okay. Let me answer the easy question first. So I'm not a citizen of Colombia, but I just had Sebastian get an investment visa for me. So I'm not sure whether it's 3 years or 5 years. Hopefully it's 3 years. I will be able to apply for dual citizenship. So citizenship in Colombia and in the United States. I'm doing that just as a plan B. If I just want to check out of the United States for a while, you've always got that option. There's no downside to doing that. As far as countries that I'd recommend, I love Colombia. especially if you're in the United States. 3-hour flight from Miami, you're on East Coast time. It's Argentina is great. What else? And there's some places in Mexico that might be good if you want to be super close to the United States. If you like Europe, which I do, I suggest Croatia and Montenegro. Why? Because the weather's great. The cost of living is very low, just like Colombia. Not as low as Colombia, but close. The food's great. The people are great. And it's, especially Montenegro, the whole entire country only has 600,000 people. So if you're looking at that as far as having a plan B scenario, if it kind of hits the fan in the developed world, you're so secluded there and isolated, and it's just a great like bug out plan, if you want to call it that. As far as the perpetual tourist, I really like that strategy as well, because if you're not spending more than 6 months in a specific country, you're not considered a tax resident. So now this doesn't really apply to US people, because wherever we go, unfortunately, we got to pay US taxes. But for Aussies or every other country in the world, in fact, other than one, there's one other country that's like the US where it taxes its citizens, but it's just a little country in Africa. For the rest of the world, if you are a citizen of, let's say, the UK or Australia or Canada, if you go to Hong Kong, you will pay Hong Kong taxes if you're a tax resident. You're not paying Aussie taxes if you don't live there, even if you're Australian. So if the tax rate in Hong Kong is 10%, then you would be paying 10% on your income, as long as it was sourced from Hong Kong or other areas. I think if it's still sourced in Australia, you gotta still pay taxes there. Now, again, I'm not an accountant, guys, so make sure you check with your CPA. I'm just giving you kind of broad stroke concepts. But my point is that if you are, let's say, a Canadian citizen and you're not taxed on your citizenship, but as your residency, then you can be a resident of, let's say Hong Kong or Singapore, where the taxes are very low. And then you can just spend 5 months out of the year in Colombia, 5 months out of the year in Croatia, maybe a couple months out of the year in South Africa or Australia, somewhere else that's very pleasant, wherever you enjoy. And you're not a tax resident of any of those places. So you're still going back to paying taxes in Singapore, but that would be on only Singapore sourced income. So if you're like a digital nomad, then you can really kind of create this scenario where your taxes are almost non-existent. And again, to be clear, that's only for people who are not US citizens. That does not apply for US citizens. The only place or the only strategy for US citizens to get a tax break is to become a resident of Puerto Rico. And if you guys want to look that up, that's they call it Act 20 and 22. And I'll probably do a video on that later. But if you guys want to check that out tonight, just Google it really quick and it'll pop right up. That's what Peter Schiff has done, Simon Black, a lot of those guys. Okay, going back to the chats here. Let me go to the bottom one to see what you guys are. Oh, okay, it's like. Oh shoot, did this thing freeze? Hopefully this thing didn't freeze. Guys, can you hear me right now? Can you guys type in the chat? I don't know if my internet froze up here. Oh yes, okay, awesome. Thanks guys, I appreciate that. Looked like the chat kind of froze up on me really quick. Okay, question. All right, Supersonic asks, what advice would you give to someone starting from scratch with little to no debt and some income from a job? I'd go back to the house hacking, honestly. And there's, especially if you're like a first-time home buyer, there's so many of these programs, these FHA programs or like military programs where you can go with like I'm not sure exactly what it is, but let's say 5-10% down, where you don't have to have a lot of money. Now, I don't know if those apply to buying multifamily, to buying a triplex or a fourplex, but do some homework. And who knows, I would start saving money. And if you live in an area that's a linear market, you might be able to buy a triplex with 10 or 20 grand saved up. So that is what I would do for someone just starting out and who wanted to really start building wealth and do something that's going to pay them dividends in the future. Then again, you take that rent that you, or that money that you would have spent on housing, and start to invest that every single month. Okay, Xavier asks, non-balloon arm for bet on debt devaluation to gain multifamily, commercial, and real estate. Well, honestly, Xavier, I don't like an arm for anything. I mean, you never know what type of inflation we could get. And if you've got an arm, I know a lot of them cap out at a specific interest rate. I was speaking with someone on one of my consulting calls that had an adjustable rate mortgage, but it capped out at 9%. So there are certain situations where, like, if you didn't owe much and you only had like 2 or 3 years of payments left, that you'd want to go ahead and just pay it out, because if you refi to a fixed rate with that, they're going to front load so much interest. It's not going to be financially beneficial, especially if you got a cap. But generally, you just got to go with fixed rate mortgage. And I think, I don't know this for sure, but I think you can still do a 30-year or at least a 15-year fixed rate for commercial. Okay, any super, don't know super chats, okay. Master asks, Master Administrator, is it possible for a Canadian expat who lives overseas, is it possible to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage in the United States? I'm 90% sure you can, but boy, I really, you know what, guys, let's do this. We'll do this. You guys see me do this in real time here. Jason Hartman, as you guys know from watching the channel, is the super expert real estate investor. I mean, he is extremely well known. He's got the most popular real estate podcast out there, and I just happen to have him on speed dial. So let's do this. I've got him on this little app right here. Let me just ask him and see if he responds. Jason, I'm on a live stream right now, and I've got a question from someone that I think you would answer a lot better, or can answer a lot better than I can. They asked, is it possible for Canadian expat to buy an income property and use 30-year fixed rate mortgage? So the bottom line is it possible for Canadian to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage in the US? Thanks, buddy. All right, we'll see what he says. And that is what is so cool about technology and a live stream. Where are you going to get that? You can just go right to the source, right to the man himself. Akmar asks, thanks for continuing to put yourself out there, George. No problem. Thanks for watching the videos, guys. Looking at the Fed site, it seems they go into repo in 2017 for a few quarters. Is that so? And what was the reason? That's a great question. I am not sure. I know every once in a while they'll have repo spikes. I know they had one last January. That's one of the things that Zoltan Pozar was talking about as a report. I'd have to look into that. I have not looked into that specifically. So I know that they've never done it like this, where it's whoops, okay, we'll do it for a day or two, and then all of a sudden it's basically permanent. But I'm not sure. That's a great question. Dina asks, it seems like the Fed and PPT can keep this going forever with the algos. Okay, how long can this go on? Dina, it's just impossible to know. It goes back to that saying that's so true, that the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. Look at Japan. Look at how long they've kept it going and kicking the can down the road. Japan, sooner or later, that's going to end very, very badly. But they've been able to pull it off for 30 years. I don't think the US can pull it off that long because of the dynamics that are at play, such as the savings rate. The Japanese, as a group, have a 33.0% savings rate. That is crazy. Where in the United States, they say it's at 6 to 8, but I don't. If you look at the way they do the numbers, I don't think it's even close. I think it's probably around 2 or 3%. So why is that important? Because if you have a population that has a 30% savings rate, as opposed to a 3% savings rate, they can absorb a lot more of those bonds, and they don't, or that government debt, and they don't have to rely on outside markets that could demand a much higher interest rate. So I'm going to do a video on this very soon, but I can't answer that. The timing, you just can't get it right. You can never get the timing right. You can only just say, okay, what do the fundamentals look like and what is going to play out? You know that, but as far as knowing when, that's impossible. Tommy asks, question.
George, the answer is yes, but it's not going to be as desirable as what a U.S. citizen gets. They can get a 20 or a 30-year fixed rate loan, probably.
Can you guys hear that?
But they have to go to a different marketplace. They can't do them through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which are the really desirable loans. So we're talking higher interest rates, less desirable terms. Sometimes they're they become adjustable in 5, 7, or 10 years, but they have them that are fixed for the duration. That market changes, so don't quote me on that. But the answer generally is yes. Just note also that the interest rates are going to be, and I haven't checked them lately, some of these private equity and hedge fund type lenders, but probably about a point to a point and a half higher than the good, really, artificially low subsidized Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loans. Hope that helps.
Wow, cool. So hopefully you guys could hear that. That was Jason. He just responded to me, and he said that it is possible. You're not going to get as good of an interest rate. He said maybe a point or two higher. And he said they have them, but they're not through Fannie and Freddie. So the bottom line is you're going to pay a little bit higher interest rate, and they're a little harder to get, but it is possible. So cool. Isn't technology awesome? Really, really cool. Okay, guys, the chat's moving pretty quick here. There was one. Nathan asks, George, what cities in Colorado would be good for real estate investment? I don't know if any would be very good, Nathan. I don't know that market very well. I know Denver is overpriced, and all the suburbs up south. I don't know about the Springs. Boulder, I know, is ridiculous. But what you need to do is you just need to look at the RV ratios first and foremost. So that means how much gross rent are you getting per month relative to the price of the property. So if the property is $100,000, if you're looking for a 1% RV ratio, which you should be at a minimum 1%, that would pay $1,000 a month gross rent. So that's what you want to look for first and foremost. If you can find that, then okay, that market's most likely going to be pretty cheap. It's at least going to be worth exploring further. That's how I'd kind of look around in those smaller markets. You know, going down the highway towards Arizona, or I'm sorry, New Mexico, there might be some towns in there that that might the numbers might work, but I just don't know because I haven't looked into those markets specifically. But start with the RV ratio. Then if you can, try to find the income, the price to income ratio. That's where I'd start kind of building an idea of whether or not that market or that city, that area is worth pursuing. Let me go back to Sebastian here. Okay, Supersonic, thank you very much for the super chat. The thank you sticker, I appreciate it. And Carl, thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, oh, this thing's moving around on me, guys. Sorry about that. Here's one. Crazy Legs asks, when these so-called euro dollars are created, does it strengthen or weaken the dollar? This is like an hour-long answer right here. Such a great question. So these are dollars that are created outside of the US and the domestic economy by foreign banks lending to corporations, even countries. So if they are lending to entities that aren't using those dollars productively to where there's a greater supply chasing the same amount of goods and services, then it could create inflation, because that's just a simple how much money supply is chasing the same amount of stuff at how high of a velocity. But a lot of the euro dollars are kept within the financial system, such as in derivatives. So as we know, and I think I went over a video of this last week with quantitative easing and why it doesn't always create hyperinflation, because there's two economies. Remember, there's the financial economy and the real economy. And the wall, the line in the sand, is the banking system. So as the way it's set up right now, I think they're going to do helicopter money and MMT and a lot of different things to get around that. But right now, no matter how much money the Fed creates, it can only get into the real economy. Not the only way, but the main way it gets into the economy is that the banks do more lending. But no matter how low you lower interest rates, if there's no demand for loans and people are tapped out, that liquidity is not going to go anywhere except, as we know, into the corporate bond market, into treasuries, into the stock market, into malinvestment, all of these things. So that's a great question, but it's impossible to know exactly what's going to happen. But those are the dynamics that are at play. No, there it is. Okay. Jeremy, got your question. It hopped around on me, but I stopped it. Will eventual collapse into anarchy once the dollar collapses? How long do you think it'll take for them to bring in a new currency? Boy, totally unknowable. I'm not going to pretend to have the answers for that. I think the only thing that you can do, Jeremy, if you think that is, well, first and foremost, you got to ask yourself, what are the probabilities of that happening? It's not 100%. It's not 0%. So, and I'm not going to say everyone has their own opinion on that. So you've got to start with that in mind. And then you've got to do homework, whether it's channels like mine, or I'm sure there's several out there on YouTube that are just as good and better. Then once you come to a conclusion for yourself as to what you think the probabilities are, then you can start to prepare for whatever outcome you think is most likely. That's an individual decision. I cannot answer that for you. And then whatever you think is the most likely outcome, that's how you want to prepare. There's no way you can guess the timing. You just have to have a plan B. So if things do play out the way you think, or if we go into a worst case scenario, then you've got it. You're already dialed in. You don't have to worry about your family. You've already got things handled. So long story short, the best answer is to do probabilities, figure out what you think is the most likely outcome, and get prepared, and just don't really worry about the timing of it, because it's just impossible to time. Question: is Nashville and suburbs a good market for real estate now? Boy, it sure was. When I was really getting involved in rental properties and real estate when I retired in 2012, I know that market was really, really good. Now I don't know, because I haven't done a lot of homework because I'm so comfortable with Kansas City. But I do the same things. You just want to look, I mean, even go on Zillow. I know Zillow isn't perfect, but you can get a lot of information. You can see the sold listings and the for rent, and you do some quick math to see what the RV ratios are. It doesn't take long, just a little 10, 15 minutes of homework, and you can determine whether or not it's at least a market that's worth exploring. And if it is, then personally what I'd do is I'd go to Jason's website, it's jasonhartman.com, and see if he has any listings in Nashville. If he does, then you know that Jason and his team have kind of put their stamp of approval on it. One thing that you guys have to know about Jason is he doesn't just go into specific markets. The markets where he does business are constantly changing based on which linear markets he thinks have the best opportunity at any given time. So I'd start with doing your own homework, and then kind of maybe cross-referencing it with Jason's website. And just so you know, if you guys want he's got investment counselors that you can just email them, and it's all free. You just go back and forth and ask your questions directly to them. But that's how I'd go about it personally. Okay, super chat, Jesse. Thanks for being here, Jesse. I think I always see you in the comments in the live stream, so I really appreciate your support and your time. Asks, what's the probability the US goes into negative interest rates? Can you do a video on negative rates, as the US is the last player to do this? Do consumers get negative rates, or just banks? I've done at least one video on negative interest rates, Jesse. I might have done two, but go back in the videos maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and I think there's at least one. I can't remember how deep I dive into negative rates, but if we look at Europe as an example, which I think we should, it doesn't go directly to the consumer. To your point, it's really affects the banks first and foremost. Then it goes to, well, I think the way it played out in Europe is it's gone from the banks to corporate debt. Believe it, I mean, it's hard for me to even say this with a straight face, but there's corporate debt right now in Europe that's trading with negative interest rates. I mean, it's tough to even get your mind around that. So, but I think then, if I remember right, I don't know if it was Sweden, it was one of the Norwegian areas where they do have consumer, I think I remember even a mortgage, like negative rate mortgage, but I don't know for sure. So banks, corporations, corporate debt, then the consumer. Will it play out in the United States? It's not my base case, but it's very close. I mean, I hate to throw out any numbers, but personally, I would give it a 30% chance. Right around there, a 30% chance of happening in the United States. That's negative. I don't know if we'd see it at the consumer level. That said, once the United States goes to a digital currency, which I don't think they're going to do any time in the near future, but I do think that that's inevitable, then I would put the probability much higher, especially if they're trying to deal with the lack of inflation or deal with what they perceive to be as potential deflation. Then the negative interest rates are, who knows, 5, 6, 7, 8%. I mean, it could just get crazy. You got to remember, if you would have talked to any economist 15 years ago, I mean, 10 years ago, and asked them about negative interest rates, they would have laughed in your face. They would have said, that is completely impossible. It will never happen. And they would have bet their life savings on it. Here we are, 10 years later, or however long it's been since, I guess Japan's had negative interest rates for a while, but however long it's been, now we got 17 trillion in negative yielding sovereign debt. You've got corporate debt in some areas, negative yielding. And I've read that story with a negative yielding mortgage. It's just completely insane. Hey, Wally, or Woo Ollie, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Thank you for the super chat. The money velocity is at historic lows. Yeah, velocity, yeah. Beside hoarding the bulk of newly created money, does quantitative easing suppress the velocity? It, in my opinion, it 100% does. The reason is because the Fed has these models, which, as we all know, are extremely flawed. One of these models says that the lower interest rates go, the more people are going to borrow and spend. I think this is nonsense, and I think that they've been proven wrong. It's obvious that they've been proven wrong, because if you're someone who's retiring right now, remember we've got the baby boomers retiring, a huge glut of the population, and you have X amount set aside for your retirement, but you're thinking you're going to get a 5% return on your money, and that's how you've planned your life for the last 30 years. If all of a sudden that 5% that you thought you were going to get on your money goes down to 1% or 0%. Are you going to go out and borrow more and spend more? Absolutely not. You're going to save more. So that's going to actually decrease the velocity, and it could actually decrease the money supply in the real economy as the Fed is increasing the money supply in the financial economy. So the takeaway is that, yes, quantitative easing definitely can suppress the velocity. Scott asks, should I cash in my 401k or part of it, even though I'll be penalized, to reinvest the money? Will pension reform and inflation demolish 401ks? Well, I'd go back to part 2 of that interview I did with Jason, because he outlines 401ks. And I'm not an expert on 401ks at all. I've never had one, so take this with a grain of salt. But he was talking about a self-directed 401k where you won't get penalized, but you can like sell out of stocks and maybe go into rental properties or gold or something like that our community, and I'm sure you kind of believe this as well, Scott, would think is a little more prudent than being in the stock market when it's at all-time highs. And also, why is it at all-time highs? It has nothing to do with the fundamentals. It has 100% to do with liquidity. That's the reason the market is at all-time highs. So do I want to have my money invested in something that is not only extremely expensive, but is only expensive due to artificial liquidity? For me, no way. No way. But I would start there, Scott. And I think that's the best advice that I can give you, because I don't know much about the 401ks. Okay, guys, just looking for a question here. Okay, Steven asks, in the spirit of the season, any comments on things like frankincense and myrrh? That used to be a good store of value, but obviously changed over the years. Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. Good point. Could gold lose and Bitcoin gain? Sure, of course. Absolutely. But I wouldn't put those in the same category, because gold to me is insurance. And your example of the frankincense and myrrh is perfect, because it just shows you that gold, after 5,000 years of human history, is still a store of value, and it still buys the same amount of stuff that it did 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and all the other stores of value. Maybe not all of them, of course, silver, but none of the others, or very few of them, are around today. None of the currencies are. So I think that says everything that you need to know about gold right there. And Bitcoin is a speculation. It's in my opinion, I know a lot of people love Bitcoin, and so do I. I love from a philosophical standpoint, I'm 100% on board with Bitcoin, but it's just too volatile, and it doesn't have the history to be put in the category of an insurance policy. Okay. Oh. Boy, these questions are, sorry guys, I'm trying to get a question here. Hey, Blueberries asks, in a recent video, you said you did not believe we would have hyperinflation, but you you'd also mentioned you believe gold would go to 100K. Would that not result in hyperinflation? Okay, well, first of all, guys, and I need to do a better job of this, but a lot of times when I'm doing videos like the Jim Rickards video, it's not that I'm saying I think gold will go to 100K. I'm saying that it could, and if it did, even if it's a 5% chance or 10% chance, this is how it could go there. It's not to say I think this is going there. So I think I need to do a better job of communicating the difference between my personal beliefs or what I think is the most probable outcome, and me explaining how it could get there, or someone else's opinion like Rickards on how it could go to 10 or maybe 50,000. So let me make sure I'm answering your question specifically. Oh, and I didn't believe we'd go into hyperinflation. I don't recall that. I might say that if you define hyperinflation the way the IMF does, and I did a video on that outlining all those studies that the IMF has done on the countries who have experienced hyperinflation in the last, I think it was 30 or 40 years. And that was an older video, but I would strongly suggest watching that one. It's got the thumbnail of the dollar sign kind of like blowing away in the sand. And so if you define it the way they define it, the IMF, I would say that the probability is definitely more than zero, but I wouldn't give it more than 5 or 10%. But that's the way they define it. That doesn't mean that we couldn't get 30, 40, 50% inflation in the United States. Look at the 1970s. We got up to 10, 12, 15%, and that's the way it was measured. It could have been a lot higher than that. And think about that. We were at 10 or 15% in the 1970s, and they had to go to Carter bonds. Think about how extreme that is. So if we got up to 30, 40, 50%, I mean, my goodness, that would it would get very ugly. So it all depends on how you define hyperinflation. Okay, I think we're caught up with Sebastian. Cool. Gregory asks, ever compared the graph of the Fed funds to the graph of the Dow gold? It looks like the same pattern, which to me would mean we've entered a 20 or 30 gold bull market. If you look at a starting point of 1970 or even 1980, I guess, to today, well, I guess it'd have to go back to when we left the gold standard. Yeah, if you look at when we left the gold standard to today and adjust for inflation, I'm sure gold has really, really gone up. I don't know if it's gone up as much as the S&P or not. That would be a really interesting video. Also, another thing I'd look at, Gregory, is M2, which is the kind of the broad money supply. If you look at a chart of that and compare it with the Dow, I think you'll see the money supply has actually increased faster than the Dow. So that's worrisome as well. But listen, it's still the same point, and that's that the market right now is just completely predicated on liquidity and artificial liquidity, and that game just it can't go on forever. The stock market is completely detached from the economy. It has nothing to do with the economy whatsoever. Hey, Tom. Tom, I had your question, and this thing just No, no, shoot. I can't find it. Okay, moving on here. One Life asks, hello, George. Please expand how the shadow banking is influencing what's going on in the real economy. I'm trying to give you a really good answer on that. So shadow banking just, I think the biggest risk of shadow banking is it's creating dollars that are outside of the purview of the Fed. They've got blinders on, and they think that they completely control the money supply of dollars, and that is not true. So if they're assuming that, let's just say there's $18 trillion in the system, we know from looking at Snyder's stuff and that it's at least double that, especially if you believe his opinion of the Eurodollar market being the actual reserve currency. So my point is that there's so many dollars that exist outside of the system or outside of what they know, that tunnel vision that they have. If we were to get inflation that really picks up, all those dollars come back, these hot potatoes that no one wants to hold on to because they're afraid that they're going to lose purchasing power. So how does that play out? We always say that the dollar can be a hot potato, but how does that actually work? Okay, so if you're someone that has $1 million US, let's say you live in Australia, wherever, and you see that the dollar went down last year or by 15% and is continuing to go down, and you see that the CPI, as the federal government measures it, goes up to like 10%, and all you hear about in the media is inflation, inflation, inflation. What would you do? Right? You would get rid of those dollars as fast as you possibly could. You'd exchange them for a local currency, or if you wanted to keep dollar assets, you'd take that money straight back to the United States, and you would buy, let's say, a piece of real estate because you wanted a hard asset that was an inflation hedge. That's what, like the guys like Doug Casey that talk about this happening, that's what they're referring to. That's how it plays out in real life. So you can imagine the $20 trillion that's outside of the US banking system rushing back in. What that would do when you realize that inflation is all about the amount of money that's chasing the same goods and services, and then how fast that money is circulating. And if you've got all of this currency coming in from outside of the United States, obviously that's increasing the domestic money supply of dollars, but it's also increasing that velocity. So there is a scenario that you can envision where even if we didn't get that helicopter money, even if the Fed couldn't figure out how to get around the banking system to get that liquidity from the financial market from the financial economy into the real economy, if they stopped using the petrodollar as an example, whatever would create, what the catalyst would be to reduce the amount of demand for those dollars outside the US, could have them flooding back in and creating a massive amount of inflation, and it would just totally blindside the Fed. It would just be like the housing crash. They would just never see it coming. Just never see it coming. Okay, here's a good question. And I think Peter might be being a little sarcastic because I get accused of this all the time. I think this might be kind of a backhanded dig, but that's fine. That's fine. Question: what are your thoughts on Perma Bear, Doom and Gloomers? I think you've got to compartmentalize people who are considered doom and gloomers. You've got a group of people who are just doing that to sell stuff, really. And then you've got other people who are doing that because they truly believe what they are seeing. And a lot of the quote unquote perma bears are people who really understand the economy. They see it, they are spot on. Now they'll get calls wrong and they won't be able to predict timing of certain things. But as far as their analysis of the problem, I think it's spot on. So guys that I would put into that category: Rogers, Peter Schiff, Mark Faber. These are guys that, and I know you can say, well, Peter talks his book with gold and everything. Okay, I can, that's a fair argument, but I just, after listening to Peter since 2012 with his podcast, and if you look at his dad, I mean, you've got to look at what his father did. If you don't know who Peter Schiff's father was, Erwin Schiff, you've got to look at his backstory. That is not someone that just kind of went with whatever whim he felt like at the time, just sold whatever thing that he could sell to make money. That is someone that had principle to a degree that I can't even comprehend. The guy went to prison knowingly that he was going to be there probably for the rest of his life just to prove a point out of sheer principle. How many people would be willing to do that? Very few. So that's the stock that Peter comes from. So I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I think Peter's an example of someone who's in the last few years has got a lot of calls wrong, and you could say, oh, he's just a perma bull. But if you look at his analysis of the actual economy, it's spot on. Same thing with Rogers. Same thing with Faber, in my opinion. Everyone can say that I'm right, wrong. Everyone's entitled to opinion, but that's what I think. Okay. Vajra asks, if inflation is coming, then wouldn't taking out home equity to pay off things like student loans be a good idea? I don't think I'm not going to say it's a bad idea. I don't think it's a great idea because you're not buying an asset that pays you to own it. You're paying off a student loan, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can fix the rate on a student loan. I believe. I don't know. Maybe you can't. But if you could fix the rate on a student loan, there's no way I'd pay it off with a home equity line of credit. I would take out I'd refi to buy a property, a rental property that's going to give me positive cash flow, where my renter is going to be paying my mortgage payment. You're deferring your mortgage payment and that interest and the property taxes to a renter, and then you're getting paid to short the dollar by paying off a student loan, especially if you can keep it at a fixed rate. And I hate to even say this because but I would keep paying the student loan at least till you see who wins the election. Because let's be honest, if you get a Warren in there or something, they may forgive the loan. And I would just I would keep making the payments, see what happens with the election. But even if it didn't pan out, I would still take the equity in my home, especially if I was in a big cyclical market, and I would take that to a linear market to own that fixed rate mortgage that's going to pay me if we get some inflation that's above the interest rate that I'm paying on the loan. Oh, Yankee asks a good, let me try to stop this. Yankee Stacking asks a great question. Have you used private money lending, so hard money, in your real estate investments? OPM, other people's money. I have. And when I first started in real estate in 2012, I was listening to all the podcasts like Jason's and the real estate guys and Bigger Pockets, all that stuff. And I knew that that was a good way to boost your returns. At the time, I didn't need to use hard money. I had my savings from retiring, but I gave it a shot because I wanted to understand really how it worked. So I think at the time I paid 10%, and I did 2 flips in Kansas City with hard money, and they went okay. I didn't. The thing that I didn't like is dealing with all the paperwork and the kind of reporting into the hard money guy. Like I had to give him updates on what we were doing. And as you guys can probably tell from my videos, I'm not real good with authority. And I don't really, I just like doing things my own way. So I did it a couple times. I think it's a great way to invest in real estate if you know what you're doing. You got to know what you're doing, and it's a great way to boost your returns. So I would look into it, but it just wasn't right for me. And by the way, that is one way that you can get leverage or use leverage in Colombia, in Medellin. It would be impossible for a gringo to get a mortgage down there, but there is hard money, and it's reasonable, 12%. And the hard money here in the States that I paid was 10. So you figure 12 down there, that's not bad. Oh, here's a good question. Dark Horse. A lot of real estate questions tonight, guys. That surprises me because the real estate videos don't get as many views, but obviously there's a lot of people watching. So that's great. That's great. I'm definitely going to keep doing the real estate videos, even though they're not very popular, or they're not the most popular. He or she asks, I live in Japan, where the housing market has been deflating for years. That's right. Very cautionary tale to those people in the United States that think that the real estate market will just go up forever. Could a rental property strategy work in this environment? Thank you. 100%. In fact, for sure, because if you can get a loan denominated in yen at a fixed rate, oh man, that would be a gift. Whew, that would be awesome. I don't know if they do 30-year loans there. And for those of you watching who don't know this, the only reason that we have 30-year loans in the United States is because they're subsidized. That a 30-year loan, a 30-year mortgage, especially a fixed rate mortgage, does not exist in a free market. So Fannie and Freddie have to prop up the market by buying that debt because the banks would never keep that loan on their books because it's a money loser. So I don't know if they have that product, that loan product in Japan. If they do, and if you can get a 1% RV ratio, which I have no clue because I haven't looked into that market, then yeah, I think it could be a fantastic strategy. But it's got to be in the right area. You've got to have meaning in an area that is most likely going to have high demand. In the next 20 years, I'd go in a starter home and good RV ratios. And then I think especially when you can get I don't even know what the mortgage rate in yen would be, but I'm guessing 2%, maybe 1.5%, maybe. Man, that would be great. Just think about that. With all the debt that they have in Japan, at some time they've got to see inflation. And if you could lock in a 1.5% interest rate, wow, that would be great. Awesome question. Okay, sorry guys. I'm trying to stop the feed here. Okay, there I got one. Tom asks, how do you think that increasingly better trading bots will influence the stock market? So I'm assuming you're talking about algorithms. That's more of a trading question, Tom, and I'm not an expert on trading. I've the only thing I know is just through listening to podcasts like Macro Voices or watching specials on Real Vision. I haven't really studied it myself, and I know there's pros and cons with the algorithms. You know, they provide, I think, a lot of liquidity, but they are very, I think they increase maybe the volatility if we were to get into a situation that would normally have high vol, because there's no discretionary decision making. But that's as far as I want to go, because I don't want to, I'm not an expert there, so I don't want to give you bad advice. Okay, so we got a super chat from ROI Co. Thank you very much. Asks, is gold confiscation a risk in your calculations? For sure. If you just look throughout history, the US did it, UK did it. I think it's definitely something that you have to think about. So that's another reason why my third rule in investing is to diversify the portfolio, but you've got to diversify your political risk. And I would have some of my gold on me or at my disposal in your backyard and in your safe, whatever. But then I'd also have a portion of it outside of your political jurisdiction. And this isn't just for Americans. This is for Aussies, Canadians. I don't care where you live. You've got to have some of that wealth outside of the government's control that you have to answer to. I think that's the best way to put it. So maybe that's Singapore, storing some there, maybe Perth. There's a lot of different options there, but that's how I'd plan for that, to make sure that I've got some sort of hedge there in case you get a situation like that, which unfortunately they've done it in the past. So why won't they do it in the future? Okay, Sebastian, I've got Giancarlo's question here, so you don't have to text that to me. So I'll just, oh, you did anyway. Okay. Giancarlos, thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. Do you think that if there isn't any positive news after February, because Fed will stop repo operations, will trigger a panic, or will negative earnings? Well, I think if I'm reading your question right, Carlos, you're assuming that the Fed is going to stop repo in February. I don't see that happening. They may be, that may be their timeline right now if you go to the New York Fed's website, but they just keep increasing and increasing the timeline. And I think that intervention, if you want to call it that, into the repo market is going to be just like QE. That once they start, they're never going to stop. They might take breaks, but eventually it's going to come back. And I think Jeff Snyder, is right on the money when he says that the system is broken today, but it originally broke in 2008. When we went through the GFC, that's when the financial system broke, and it's been broken ever since. It's never fixed itself. So I think they're going to keep doing it. So I don't think that'll trigger a panic. And I don't know about negative earnings. It's just, there's so much liquidity in the system right now. I don't even think earnings matter, because what if you get negative earnings? Well, then the market's going to assume that the Fed's going to inject more liquidity into the system. So it's heads I win, tails you lose. It just doesn't matter. They get good earnings and the stock market goes up because of good earnings. They get bad earnings and the stock market goes up because they think the Fed's going to inject more liquidity into the market to prop it up. It's insane. So I think that's the best way that I can answer your question, Giancarlo. Good question. And again, I appreciate the super chat. Okay, D asks, George, if you have an SBA loan in a commercial property, okay, can you refinance the loan? There is no prepayment penalty, and I am paying extra 12% or 10% every month. Is it worth it? How can you get my rate low? I don't know if there's anything I could do for you, D. If I could, I'd wave the magic wand right now and make it happen. I've never had an SBA loan before, so I want to start with that. So anything I say here is just complete speculation. I would assume that if you use an SBA loan to buy a commercial property, that I don't know why you couldn't refi that, because you're just paying off your existing lender with new money. And I don't see how that couldn't be legal or part of the agreement with the original SBA loan. Then the next thing I would say is if you could get fixed rate debt, I don't know how long the term is on your SBA loan, but if you could get 30-year fixed rate mortgage on that, obviously I'd want you to refi with that. If you could do 15, that's great. But it's tough for me to say because I don't know the terms of your SBA loan. John Adams asks, do you speak Spanish or have to know the Colombian language, which is Spanish, to live there, or can you get by in English? No. You get by in English easy, John. Super, super easy. I've been to over 40 countries, and I only speak English. And nowadays they've got so much technology. You just talk right into Google, and it translates right there for you. In Colombia, where I hang out the most, there's a lot of people speak English, but even if you didn't, the Spanish required to get by, which is basically restaurant Spanish, taxi Spanish, and hotel Spanish, you can learn in 2 weeks. It's really easy, especially if you're in that environment and you're trying to speak it on a daily basis. You learn it very, very fast. So that should not be a barrier for you going down there, or at least going down there on vacation and seeing if you like it. So David asks, please, George, could you explain trickle up economics? as compared to trickle down economics? So let me try to think this through out loud. I'm assuming what you're saying is that the Fed, the whole premise of trickle down economics is that you increase the level of the market. Basically you increase asset prices, and those who hold assets are going to spend more money. That's going to go into the economy, and that's going to boost the economy. Another way to look at it is you reduce taxes. That increases the amount of money or capital that entrepreneurs have to spend on growing their business. That creates more jobs. There's a lot of variables in there. So taking the opposite of that approach, which would be, and I don't know if this is what you're saying, David, but I'm assuming you're saying like helicopter money. So when you're taking and doing QE for the people, let's call it that, or UBI, where you're putting $1,000 a month in every single American's pocket, and they're going out and spending that, and that's creating demand from the bottom up. The problem with that is that if you've got a regulatory environment where businesses, or especially if you got a Fed put, where the businesses that are getting that money aren't using that money in a way that's to increase productivity, then you're going to have more money chasing the same amount of goods and services. You're just going to get inflation. It's not going to increase the purchasing power, and that's the problem with the Keynesian approach to. It's just all demand. We got to increase consumer demand. Well, that only works if the stuff that's in the economy increases at the same rate. So I think that answers your question, or I hope that answers your question. But it's an interesting way of looking at it, is trickle up instead of trickle down. I mean, here in El Souls says, so let me expand on this a little bit further, because it looks like a couple more people are talking about it. The way that the money supply should increase in the economy, if you want to do it through our existing banking system, through lending isn't bad. I don't think fractional reserve banking in and of itself is bad, or even whatever variation of fractional reserve banking we have right now, and that's debatable. But it creates an environment where people can use it for consumption as opposed to productivity. So if you've got loans going out into the economy that are being used for consumption only, it's just going to create inflation. If you've got debt that's being created that's only going into the financial economy, the only thing it's going to do is create bubbles and boom bust cycles. But if you've got that same liquidity that's going out into the real economy, increasing the money supply and it's going to businesses, small businesses, mid-sized businesses, entrepreneurs that are creating more stuff and increasing productivity, then you're going to have low inflation. You're going to have very low inequality. The poor and the middle class, their standard of living is going to raise just as fast as the rich, and it's just it's the best. How do I want to say this? It's the best solution for an imperfect world, and so there's always going to be imperfections with capitalism. As an example, you can always point at flaws in capitalism, and that's very true, but it's the best system for an imperfect world dealing with imperfect human beings. There is no utopia. Okay, I'm at a minute 30. Geez. You tell my brain's fried. My brain is already on holiday, guys. Sorry. We're at an hour and 30 minutes. Just got a super chat, so let me answer this and a couple more questions, and we'll move on. I'll get to dinner, and we'll get on to the holiday. Matthew asks, would you consider Charleston, South Carolina to be a linear market or cyclical? Moving there, looking to invest. So I'd say the same thing, Matt, as I've told a few people on the live stream today. Just go to Zillow, do the homework, check out what the RV ratios are, just in general. Try to find some information on price to income. So what you could do is, even if you've just got Zillow, just try to find what the average household income is in Charleston, and then try to find what, just by scanning Zillow, kind of what the average normal starter home or average mid-size home is. And then you can just pretty much do the math right there, even if there's not official data on that. And that's where I'd start. And if the numbers look good, the RV ratio, the price to income ratio, then I would go ahead and explore it further. Excuse me, explore it further. All right. I need to get going here while I can still talk. All right, a couple more questions here. Okay. Akshay asks, hey, George, you inspired me to get into economics. Very cool. Awesome. Your last video was technical regarding Zoltan. So my question is, what would you advise in learning economics and learning what you know? I learned everything I know from podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube, and Google, and just trying to figure out how stuff works. I'm one of those people that, if you say, George, quantitative easing increases the money supply, I'm not just going to say, oh, okay, cool, great. I've got to know, okay, you're telling me it's increasing the money supply. I want to know why and how. So I'm always trying to figure stuff out. I'm always trying to figure out how things work. So if you've got kind of that type of personality, I think that you're going to learn as much as you need to learn with just a few audiobooks and some podcasts. So you want to start with Macro Voices. You want to look at Real Vision. If you've got the money to subscribe to their service, I'd strongly suggest it. If not, that's fine. They've got a lot of free content on their YouTube channel. As far as books, I would look at Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. I'd read some of Roger's books, Schiff's books. He's got some really basic ones. I think one is something about how an economy grows. Tom Woods show. He's more of a libertarian, but he goes into a lot of the Austrian ideas. And then Contra Krugman is another great podcast that Tom Woods does with Bob Murphy, who's a really smart guy in the Austrian space. And I just start there. I mean, even now, you guys have to realize that although I do those videos for the YouTube channel, even if I wasn't doing a video or a YouTube channel, that's all I do. Seriously, that's all. I'm like addicted to it. So when I'm at the gym, it doesn't matter, doing weights or on the treadmill, I'm listening to Macro Voices. If I'm even just walking down the street, if I'm walking to dinner, I'm listening to the latest video from Real Vision, or I'm listening to a Market Wizards book, or it's just nonstop. I've always got my headphones in. The plane today, that's what I was doing. I was listening to podcasts, and then I was doing research on how the modern banking system works. According to the Bank of England, they came out with a paper. I don't know how long it is. It's maybe 10, 11 pages. And I was just diving into that, just trying to absorb as much as I could. But I'd be doing that even if I wasn't doing the videos. That's just what I like doing. So that's my best advice. Okay, we'll do one more. Yeah, we got up to speed on the super chats. See if I can focus my brain for one more question here. Okay, the question is, what are pros and cons of holding, I lost it, REITs versus physical real estate? REITs are a lot easier to buy, a lot more liquid. You don't have to manage them. I think those would be my top pros to REITs. The number one con is that you are not in control of the asset. So who knows how they're paying themselves, the guys or gals that are managing the REIT. You can get an idea of what they're investing in, that's good, but I like being in control. And I have more confidence in my own decision-making process than anyone else. And also, I think that like Milton Friedman always said, every individual is going to manage their own money a lot better and in a lot more thoroughly and prudently than other people are going to manage their money, right? So, or OPM. If you've got a guy that's in charge of a fund and he's got no money in the fund, and it's $1 billion fund, but it's all these people that he's probably never met before, he's not going to be as careful with that money as he is with his own $1 million or $100,000. I think that's the number one reason. And then number two is you're not going to be able to use 30-year fixed rate mortgage on that. So you're not going to be able to short the dollar. You're not going to be paid to short the dollar. I don't think it's a great inflation hedge. And then also going back to the cons, it's going to have a lot of market risk. So you could have a situation where the stock market crashes like 1987, and that may take down REITs because they're in the market. So all boats rise and fall with the tide, but that rental property during that same time frame could do extremely well. It's a little more work for a rental property, but at the end of the day, I think it's worth it. It's worth it. Okay, guys, thanks for being on the live stream. We had, I think, 500 plus. That's fantastic. That's amazing. I still am taken back by the community, and I just really want to wish each and every one of you a Merry Christmas, a happy holiday. Oh, and I want to go over a couple things here. Number one, just to reiterate, if you guys do want to book my time for an hour so I can answer your specific questions, email Sebastian at admin@georgegammon.com. Number one. Number two is either next week or the week after, I'm going to be taking the audio from the Rebel Capitalist show, and we're going to be turning that into a podcast. And also, I'm going to be turning the audio from the live streams into a podcast as well. So the game plan right now is for the Rebel Capitalist show to go live as a podcast, just the audio, on Tuesdays, and then on Thursdays we'll upload just the audio from the live stream as a podcast. So we will have that within the next couple weeks. So stay tuned for that. And then the schedule for the holidays, we're not going to have a video tomorrow, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, just so I can take some time off and enjoy my family. But we will start back up on Friday. So Friday, expect another video. Until that time, guys, enjoy your family. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and we'll see you Friday.